Hello. Hello, how are you? Hi, Shravani. Am I audible? So I hope you're taking proper medication. So can we start? So it has become all in one now. Okay. What you did MBBS at home? Like as we have already done with all the concepts, now I'll be asking you a few questions based on the sublet JSP, EJB, Spring, and Hibernate because we have already covered mm, Java, core Java we have already covered. So I'll be starting with servlets and JSP. Now starting with the first question, can you just let me know what is the difference between a web server and the application server? Yeah, today will be the last class because we are done with all the topics. Last topic was web services that we have already completed. So today we'll be discussing the questions related to the interview, and if you have any doubts you can ask. And I'll be anyway available on mail if you have any further questions. But today, it is the wrap-up session. So what is the difference between the web server and the application server? Which is the lightweight server and which is the heavyweight server? Okay, yeah. Okay, correct. Web server is the lightweight server, whereas application is heavyweight. Can you give one example for a web server and one example for the application server? It is better if you come over mic because it will be easy for you rather than typing. Tomcat, okay, you can consider it my voice. Oh shit. Okay, fine. So you can just type in phrases, that is okay. So one example for web server and one example for the application server. So your Tomcat will come under web server, whereas Glassfish will come under application server. Now, can you list few server-side components? One anyway, I'll say you that is servlet. Can you list other server-side components? Like it is difficult for me to cancel the class because again tomorrow I have got some other class and today I have adjusted the timings. So it is okay if you can just type in one word over the chat window. Server-side components. You can type your answers in the chat window. It is okay. Okay, server-side components that provide API for the user, yes, correct. They are interfaces, correct. Servlets, all your JSPs, all these are obviously these are interfaces, and it will come under server-side components. Uh, Servlet lifecycle method. This is pretty easy, but most of the time they ask this question. What are the servlet lifecycle methods? Okay. So servlet, as you said, okay, it has got lifecycle method. It sends the request, yes. Correct. Okay. Yes, correct. When the servlet it sends a lifecycle to the request, but it has got three lifecycle methods. One is init, second one is service, and the third one is destroy. Init, service, and destroy. And what is the difference between the servlet interface and then the HTTP servlet? What is the difference between servlet interface and HTTP servlet? Difference between servlet and HTTP servlet. Okay, it provides the common behavior for the servlets. Correct. It provides common behavior of the servlet, but the difference between the servlet and the HTTP servlet is the servlet interface, it can work for any type of protocol, but whereas HTTP servlet is only for the HTTPs, it is only for, it is specifically designed for the HTTP protocol. For any other protocol, this servlet interface will work, but for HTTP protocol, we have got HTTP specific servlet. Now, how is post different from the get? Correct, HTTP provides abstract class. How is get different from post? Which is idempotent, which is non-idempotent. And what do you mean by idempotent? Get is for getting the data, correct? Post is for creating new resource. Yeah, correct, perfect. And the amount of data what you can send through the get method is limited and it is not secure, whereas post is secure. If in case if you want to upload any photo or if you want to send some bulk amount of data, then obviously you should not go for the get method, you should go for the post method. We should go with the get method if and only if you are requesting for a resource. But if in case, as you said, if you are posting or if you want to create a new resource, then you should go with the post method. So what are the different scopes that are available to shade the objects between the web components? One is your request scope. What are the other scopes? What I am asking is, you've got this request dot set attribute. So over here, you provide some key and then value. It will help you save the object in the request scope. In the request scope. So then, in addition to this, what are the other? One is request scope. Second one, what you have is session scope. So you can store the object in the session. And then okay, you can even store the object in the servlet context. So these are the different scopes that are available: request scope, session scope, context scope, and then the correct application scope. So what you have said is that as we have discussed in the web services, we have got four different methods: put, create, update, and delete. Yes, that are the four different things that are available to perform the operations in the database whenever the client is sending the request to the server. But when it comes to storing the objects and the request, storing the object at the application level, we have got four different scopes. One is request, session, and then the context, application scope. Fine. So how is session scope different from the context scope? How is session scope different from the context scope? Correct, session scope are accessible from different pages. Oh wow, correct. Context. Now, session scope is accessible within within the application, whereas context scope is again accessible to all the pages within the application. And the lifetime of the session is from, you can say, unless and until your session expires. The whatever objects that is stored in the session scope will be available until the session expires, whereas the objects that are shared in the context scope are available throughout the lifetime of the web application. So can you give me a scenario wherein you have used session scope and wherein you have implemented session scope and then the context scope? Scenario wherein you have implemented session scope and then the context scope in your web application where you have implemented this. Okay, login page, correct. Fine, for login pages you can go with the session scope and context scope. Yeah, correct, login for session. Context scope, as we have seen in the string and the hibernate, if you want some resources to be initialized at the time of deployment, then you can go with the context scope. If you want some resources to be initialized when you are deploying the application, and if you want those resources to be available throughout the lifetime of the web application, then you can share them at the context scope. Now we have got these two objects, servlet config and the servlet context. How is the servlet config different from servlet context? Correct session scope is for temporary purpose. Servlet config versus servlet context. When does the container create servlet config object in the lifecycle of the servlet? At what point of time does servlet config object is created by the container? Okay, initialization of parameters. Yes, with the help of the servlet config object, you can do it. Correct. Servlet config object is created by the container after the object is created, after the servlet object is created. First it loads the class, then it calls the constructor. After the constructor is called, the servlet will create the servlet config object and then it calls the init method. When the servlet config object is created by the container, then your servlet will get all the properties of the servlet. That is, multi-threading support it will get from the container, handshaking, and lifecycle management. All these things it will be done after the creation of the servlet config object. And then at what point of time is servlet context object created? When does it create servlet context object? Servlet config is correct, but it creates the servlet config object when it is at the time of deployment. That is, a servlet context object is created when the web application is deployed, whereas servlet config object is created when the servlet constructor, after the servlet constructor has been created, the container will create the servlet config object. Yes, correct. Servlet context can be accessed using servlet context. So at the time of deployment, when you're deploying the application, servlet context object will be created. When you are undeploying the application, servlet context object will be destroyed. So the lifetime of the servlet context object is since the time it is deployed to the time it is undeployed. Then you have got implicit JSP objects. What are the implicit JSP objects? There are nine implicit objects that are provided by the container to the service method of the JSP. I repeat, for our information, there are nine implicit objects that are provided by the container to the JSP page. That is your print writer, JSP context, page context, servlet context, and in the HTTP session and JSP writer. These are servlet config, a request object, request response. So these are the nine implicit objects that are provided by the container to the JSP service method. So this, so you need to remember all the nine implicit objects. So your life cycle of the servlet is in its service in destroy, and again some JSP also it has got same life cycle methods, but there are again two phases in the execution of JSP. What are those two phases? While you're executing the JSP, you have got two phases. So what are those two phases? Yeah, correct. Out, initialization, initialization. Okay, fine. Implicit objects are correct. There are two phases. How is servlet different from JSP? And how will the life cycle and how the execution phase of the JSP is different from the servlet? Okay, correct compilation. Execution and cleanup. Oh, okay, fine. Compilation is correct, and after compilation, you have got translation. It has got two life cycle, two phases. One is compilation phase. The second, sorry, first is translation phase. The second one is compilation phase. In the translation phase, your JSP will get converted into servlet, whereas in the compilation phase, your servlet will be compiled. And then finally, it comes to execution. Translation means initialization. No. Translation means your .jsp page will get converted into servlet. Translation is your .jsp page. The container will translate or will convert your JSP page to the Java code, to the servlet code. Conversion of JSP page to the Java code is called as translation phase. How is servlet different from the JSP? That is, when you can do all server-side programming with the help of the servlet, then why do we need to go for the JSP? What are the advantages you get when you're going with the JSP? Okay. What are the boundary components, and what are the different technologies what we can use to implement the boundary components? Anyway, one is JSP, JSF, HTML, all these are called as boundary components. Boundary component is the one with which the user will interact. So JSP is used for implementing the boundary components. That is view pages. Before we step into the custom tags, uh, what is the page directive? What is the page directive? A page directive, it is an attribute that will, it is a directive, it is one of the type of the directive that will help you provide information to the JSP page. Overall translation of the JSP page. It will affect the overall translation of the JSP page. Let's say I have the JSP page and that JSP page object is not taking part in the session. I have a JSP page and that JSP page object is not taking part in the session. That is, I don't want to maintain the session on that page. Let's say it is just simple page, thank you for using our website, etc., etc. It is this type of page. So on this JSP page, I don't want to maintain the session. So how do I disable the session on the JSP page? How do I disable? Okay, correct. Directive is provides instruction, page translation. Yes. So how do you disable the session at for a particular JSP page, for a single JSP page? That is, you are not interested in maintaining the session and it has to be disabled. Yeah, hello. Hello, sorry. I'm fine. How about you? If you have to disable the session, you will be using session is equal to false at the page, and the page directive you need to use the session attribute and you have to set it to false. That will disable the session on the JSP page. Now when there are already these many tags that are provided by the JSP, then why do you have to go with the custom tags? So tags will help you develop your own tags. That is one of the advantage when you're going with the custom tag, and the second advantage which you get is you can develop your own tags and it is a reusable component. You can reuse it on any of the pages. If you're writing your code and scriptlets, you have to do copy and paste on each and every page. But if you are using the custom tag, point number one, it will help you eliminate the Java code from your JSP page, and it is a reusable component. It can be reused at multiple places. Now, let me ask you a few questions on the EJP. Now, in order to run the application, can you run either the application on standalone as a standalone component? EJP applications, yes, it can be executed as standalone as well as, okay, you can execute it onto the server-side components. Both it can execute standalone as well as server-side. So you have got three things. One is stateless bean, stateful bean, message-driven beans, and the single-length bean. These are the four different types of beans that are available. So how is a stateful bean different from the stateless bean, and what are the scenarios in which you will use them? Where you have implemented the stateful and stateless. So if you have to develop an application, let's say you have to develop an e-commerce website. So what are the scenarios wherein you will use the stateful bean and where will you use stateless bean? If in case if you have to develop an e-commerce application, where will you use this? Oh, no. It doesn't mean stateless doesn't mean it does not require the server information. The difference between the stateless and the stateful bean is when an operation and a business operation can be completed within a single step, then you can go with the stateless bean, and when it has to be completed in a series of steps, then you go with the stateful bean. So message driven bean, where you have implemented this message driven bean. The example for the stateless and one example for the stateless and one example for the stateful is, let's say you just want to get a resource from the server. So this operation, it does not require multiple steps. You can just at one shot you're requesting for an image. You have to just, let's say you just click on that and you have to download the image. If the session has to be maintained, then you should go with this stateful bean. And let's say if you're developing a download manager, and then if you want to provide the resume capability, that is at some later point of time you can resume your download or you can pause the download. Then if you want to track the status of the client, then you should go with the stateful bean. If you don't want to track the state of the client, then you should go with the stateless bean. Let's say you just have to download, you're downloading some 10 MB of data, wherein there is a probability that the client might pause and as well as resume the download. So when the client is pausing the download, you have to track the status of the client. And when the client is again resuming the download, again status should be tracked. So when the status has to be tracked, then you should go with the stateful bean. When an operation can be completed in one single step, that is, let's say you're posting a message onto a wall. This operation, it can be completed within a single step. It is atomic operation. It does not consist of series of operation. Then you can go with the stateless bean. And let's say you're having an e-commerce application. So when you are having an e-commerce application, you need to maintain the session. So the time the user has selected an item, and then the user has next put the item into the basket, and then you have clicked on the check proceed, and then you have entered your billing information and all credit card information. Then finally you have placed the order. So for placing an order, it consists of these many operations. First, you need to select the item, then you need to put it into the cart, then proceed to checkout, fill the billing details, and uh, and then finally okay, you have to place the order. So this business process, it consists of series of steps. Then you need to go with the stateful. Simple. When you have to maintain the state of the client, go with the stateful. When a process doesn't require the client state to be maintained, then you can go with the stateless bean. And this one, these Stateless and the stateful. These session beans by default they are synchronous. What are the beans you use if you have to do asynchronous communication? If you want to implement asynchronous communication, then which beans would you use? Anyway, answer is already written. Okay, you use message-driven bean for asynchronous communication, and this beans will always execute onto the server side. Container will pull the bean from the bean pool. Coming to Spring, what is the dependency injection? What are the advantages you get over your normal Java programming? Why we should go for the Spring framework? As all the stuff that can be implemented with the help of the servlets and the JSP. So what are the advantages of the Spring and what is dependency injection? Why you should go for with the Spring framework when you already have the other technologies that are there in the market, servlets, JSP, struts, etc., etc. So what are the advantages you get with Spring? Message will be what you have written. So what is the dependency injection? What is the inversion of control in the Spring? And why to go with the Spring framework when you have other frameworks that are, what advantages you'll get when you're going with the Spring framework when it comes to writing the program using the normal Pojo classes. You don't remember? Okay, just try to revise it. How setter injection was different from the constructor injection? So when will you go with the setter injection and when will you go with the constructor injection? Why these many different types of injections are provided? When to go with the setter injection, when to go with the constructor injection. So give a scenario wherein you have implemented this. Just try to recollect these concepts. Application context object in the Spring when it is created by the container and what is its scope and where all it can be used. Okay, your setter injection, yes, correct. It will call the set methods. Constructor injection, yes, it will call the constructor methods. But what is the difference between them? You should use? When you should go with the setter, when you should go with the constructor injection. Now, like you can go with the constructor injection if it is like one-time initialization and you don't want the properties to be changed thereof, then you can avoid get a what do you say? You can go ahead with the constructor injection. Otherwise, okay, you can go with the this one properties. And then the second thing is if you are initializing the bean with the help of setter and the getter methods using the setter injection, then to initialize each properties, it will make a call to the bean class. Sorry, it will make a call to your setter methods. If there are 10 if there are 10 attributes for the bean class, then it will call your setter methods 10 times. Whereas when you're going with the constructor, it is initialized at one shot. So based on the requirement, you have to choose from the options available. What is AOP programming and what is aspect oriented programming? What are the advantages of it? Can you give a scenario where, and if you are implementing the aspect oriented programming, it will help the productivity of the application as well as maintenance of the application? In a scenario, if AOP implemented will help the productivity as well as maintenance of the application. Okay, so you need to brush up on the AOP, I guess, because this is an important topic. I think you don't have idea about this. I think you did not brush up the topic. Please try to brush it. Okay, let me just start a simple question in the Hibernate. What is an ORM? Impedance mismatch. Correct. ORM. Okay, fine. It stands for Object Relational Mapping. What are the various dialects supported by the Hibernate? Does Hibernate support switching from one database to the another database? Let's say okay, initially I was using DB2, and from DB2, let's say I want to switch to the Oracle. Does Hibernate support this? Immediate switching from one database to the another database without changing the code. Please try to find out the answers. Yes, correct, Zahid. Now, in the relational database, what is implemented as of today, the leading databases. So, in those database, in the object-oriented mapping, or in the object mapping, you have got inheritance, polymorphism, and all these concepts. But these concepts they are not implemented by the database. Then that is called as impedance mismatch. Anyway, I'm giving the answer also. Impedance mismatches in object in the UML modeling and the object modeling. You have various concepts like inheritance, abstraction, polymorphism, and all these concepts we have. Whereas in the relational database, we don't have these concepts. So because there is a difference in the mapping in object mapping and the relational mapping. So this mismatch is called as impedance mismatch. What is lazy fetch and then the eager fetch, or lazy initialization or eager initialization, which is beneficial? Give me a scenario wherein you have implemented the lazy fetch and you got stuck somewhere. What will happen if you're implementing the lazy fetch in a web application? I think you need to work on this. Criteria queries. Criteria class. What it is used for? It is used for creating the criteria queries in terms of objects. So if you're using the criteria class, it is not mandatory for you to know the SQL statements. So at the criteria interface, this one, again, the criteria library is provided with many built-in methods with the help of which, rather than writing the queries in the pure SQL statement, you can write the queries in terms of object. So it goes well along with the object model and rather than the relational model. In general, when you have to fetch the data from the database, we make use of SQL statements, but with the help of the criteria query, you can write the terms or you can write your statement to fetch the data from the database in terms of object, and Hibernate will convert that criteria statements into the respective SQL statements to retrieve the data from the database. So criteria queries will help you write the queries or will help you design the queries in object format, in object model. Coming to web services, so what you've got SOAP and then the Jersey. These are the different types of web services that are available. One is SOAP, most popular one, and the second one what you have is Jersey. So first, what is the web service? Why to go with the web service? Let's say you're writing a code, you're developing a code, and you want that code to be accessible on various devices. Let's say you are writing some information, you are writing some piece of code for your weather data to get the weather information, and that weather information is accessible on the various devices. That is, on the cell phone you want it to be accessible, you want the weather information to be accessible onto the desktop, onto the Yahoo Mail page, on the various pages you want the information to be accessible. Then how do you do that? Correct, through web services. Let's say you have got cricket live score. You have got live cricket score. Again, if you see the live cricket score, it will be displayed on many websites, and then again you can get it on your mobile phones. So there are the various ways in which you can get. Again, how do you do this? Obviously through web services. So when you want a piece of code to run on different hardware and the platform, then you can go with the web services. What is pagination in web services? Okay, correct. We use either SOAP or XML to implement the web services. What is pagination in web services? Simple concept. I'm asking you a very simple concept. Okay, yes, you'll use pagination and REST. So simple pagination, it will let you specify from where to start and then from where to end. If you're saying display the records from 1 to 25, then this concept is called as pagination. It is as simple as that. How is put different from update? You have got different methods. How is put different from update? How is put method different from update method? Okay, correct. Put as for insertion. Oh, sorry. Sorry, it is not put. How is put different from post? Post versus put. Put is for insertion. Sorry, put is for update, not insert. Put is to update. And post. Okay, correct. Post is for creating a new resource, whereas put is for insert. What is content negotiation? How do you implement content negotiation? Content negotiation is there are the different ways in which the format in which the information can be requested by the client. The client may request the server to send the data in the JSON format. This is called as content negotiation. What is the format in which the client is requesting the data to be sent by the server side? So if the client is requesting the server to send the data in the text format, then the server should have the methods that will send the data to the client in the text format. So what you ask is what you get. If you're requesting to the server in format X or in the XML format, then the server should send the information back in the XML format. If you're asking the server to send the information in JSON format, then the server should send the information back to the client in the JSON format. So this is what is called as content negotiation. You are negotiating it that what you want content X in which format. So if you say XML, the server will send you the data in the XML format. If you say JSON, the server will send you the data in the JSON format. This is how it works. Can you give some examples for the live web services? Let's say I'm developing a ticketing application, book ticketing, what do you say, for booking the movie tickets. And I want this to be accessible on your mobile devices as well as on the desktop application. So how do I do that? Let's say I'm developing an application to book the movie tickets and I want this to be accessible on the mobile devices as well as on the desktop devices. So how do you do that? Yeah, post is for creating a new resource, that is correct. Okay, correct. You can go with the SOAP web service. Yes. So that's all for the day. With this, I have covered few questions on servlets, JSP, Spring, Hibernate, and web services, and few on EJB. So there are few areas in which you need to work on. That anyway, I will writing it over mail to you. What are the areas in which you have to work on? So with this, we will wind up the session for the today. So if you have any queries for me, you can ask. Okay, so Shravani will wind up for you today. With this, we have completed. And if you have any questions, you just mail it to me. If you have any questions and if you are stuck in anywhere, okay, you just write a mail to me. I'll reply you back. Sure. Okay, bye bye. Thank you. Now coming to you people, we were discussing about session. So can you give me some examples? Now HTTP protocol, what we have is it is a stateless protocol. HTTP, it is a stateless protocol. So stateless protocol means it does not remember the client state. Each request is considered as a fresh request. Now, but these days web applications are going at so fast pace. Let us, if you consider an example for the e-commerce website, then it is mandatory for you. You have to maintain the track of the client. You need to find out whether it is a fresh client request or it is a repeated customer. So you have to track the client request. So in order to track the client request, what we have is we have got HTTP session, HTTP protocol. It is a stateless protocol. It does not maintain the request for the client. Each request is treated as a new request, but these applications, the current day web applications, what we have, then we need to track the client request. For that purpose, we have to maintain the session. Now, what happens over here is now Now over here, let's the request is coming to the same website. This is the first client, and this is again, okay, if you see the same color, this is green, this is again the same client. Now if you observe this request is again, it is treating as the new request. And then the third one again, it is treating as this new request. It is treating that as a new customer because what do you say, the HTTP protocol, it is stateless. Each request it treats as the same request. But what I want is, this is what is happening on the server side. Each time the client request comes in, it is treating as the new request, but the request is coming from the same user. The request is from the same user, but your web application is treating it as the same request. So what we have to do is, you should not treat this client as different clients, because this request is coming from the same browser, from the same client. So you have to treat all this as one single request. So in order to treat these multiple requests as a request that is coming from the one client, rather than considering it as three independent clients, you have to track that whether this request is coming from the same client, or it is from the a new client, or from the different client. So you need to track this. So in order to track this, what you have is, you have got HTTP session. Now over here, if you see, if you go to the any shopping website, now let's say, okay, this is, you're going to this Amazon.com. Now you have got cart over here, right? You have got cart over here. Now let's say I'm adding this to the cart. Oh, I don't remember. So add to list. Oh shit, again it is asking. Now if you see if it has added the item to the cart. If you observe over here, it has added this item to the cart. Now, one request and one response is done. One request and one response is done. Uh, Now again, let me add. Let me pick up this. Oh shit, it is almost gone. So add to cart. Now how many items do you find? So over here, if you see cart over here, okay, you've got two items. So these are the items that has been added by me to the cart. So is it allocating a new cart on each client request, or it is adding the items to your old cart itself? Is the ebay.com, is it allocating you a fresh cart on when you are adding the each item, or when you are adding, that is, when you're adding multiple items, it is giving you the same card. That is for X client, X card. Correct. It is the same card. So what it is doing is it is tracking the client. It is tracking the client request. Okay, now let me try with this another browser. ebay.com. Now over here, if you see, you don't have any item, your shopping cart is empty. Whereas on this browser, you have got two items. So on this browser, it has tracked the request. Now this is the second browser. So it is browser specific. With respect to the browser, it is tracking the client request. As you said, it is onto the same card. So over here, the system is storing the information. It is tracking the client request. Because it is tracking the client request, it is able to allocate the same card to you on each client request. So sorry, even though you are moving to and from the website. Now, how this works is you have got eBay. Let me go over the screen clipping. Now this is the one item, that is, you have selected the item, you are sending the request to the server. When you click on add to cart button, you are sending the request to the server. One request and then one response. So you are sending the request to this eBay server. So when you're sending the request to the eBay server, it is adding the item to the cart. Now let's say you have picked up another item. So this is called as one request and one response. Done. This is one request and then one response cycle. Now, then what you're doing is you are sending one more request. This is the second request what you have sent. So this is the first request and this is the second request. So when you are sending multiple requests, it is not allocating card to you. It is not allocating a new card. It is maintaining the old card for you. So you have got this card. So eBay, it is maintaining the card. First time you have added this item. This is the item what you have added. And in the second time you are adding the another item. So when you're adding the multiple item, it is not allocating you the new card each time you're sending the request. So it has identified that this request is from some this client X client from XXX address IP address. So what it is doing is it is maintaining the client state because it has remembered that this client, it is a repeated client. What it is doing is it is adding the request to the same card. It is not allocating new card to you. Clear with this? So this is how your state is being tracked. What will happen if it is not tracking the state? What will happen if it is not tracking the state? If it is not tracking the state, so many cards, yes, correct, so many cards will be created. On top of that, what happens is for this one card, and again for this one card, this it keeps on creating one card. It becomes very much difficult to program and you don't know how many items you have added. So for each stuff, each client request, it will consider it as fresh request, and as Roma said, for each client request, it will add one card. And then what will happen again is in the request response cycle, after one request and one response cycle is completed, one request and one response cycle is completed, it will destroy all the objects. If it is again the request scope, if it is request and response, this is one request and this is the response. This is called as request and this is your response. After one response in one cycle, one request and one response cycle is completed, it will delete all this data. By default, container will delete all this. So all the time you'll get a new card, and at the max you can add only one item if you're not maintaining this session. This problem you'll face. Over here, one request and one response after the cycle has been completed, then your container will delete all this. By default, the container will perform the cleanup task. That is, it will delete all the objects that are associated with the request. So all the time you will get fresh card, and at the max, for one request you can add only one item. Only one item can be added. And once the response is completed, by default container will delete all the stuff that is associated with that request. Just hold on for a second, I'll get the charger. connected. Yes. Mm. So if you have to implement this, when you want the server to remember the state of the client across multiple requests. When you want the server to remember the state of the client across multiple requests, then you have got session. In order to implement this, we need to make use of the HTTP session, because your server will consider each request as a new request and it will not maintain the session. If we have to maintain the session of the client, or we have to maintain the state of the client across multiple requests, then we need to implement session API. I hope this is clear. Is it clear? Okay. So Roma, it is clear. How about Hassan and Zahid? Is it clear? Why to go with the session? And what are the limitations of the request scope? Session does not require login. Yes. When you are programming, when it comes to the programming point of view, it does not require login. There are different ways in which session can be implemented, and this is implemented with the help of cookies. That's one. This they will implement it with the help of cookies. If you delete the cookies, now let's see what happens if you are deleting the cookies, which is this Internet Explorer Chrome. Show advanced settings, content settings, all cookies and datas. What was that? Event. Search cookies for event. Now, CO. So I don't know which cookies for what. So let me remove all these cookies. Remove all shown. So done. So if you see over here, you've got empty cart. So there are different ways in which you can track the session. When it comes to the shopping cart, most of the time they will track it in cookies. With the help of the cookies, they'll track the session. So there are different ways in which the session can be tracked. One way, again, this, as you said, okay, login is not required. Yes, login is not required for this at the server side in order to track the cookies, because they are storing or they are maintaining the shopping cart at the client side itself. So there are different ways in which the state of the client can be tracked. One is cookies. Does this answer your question, Hassan? Okay, fine. Okay, welcome. So HTTP session, identify the client using the HTTP session, and that is whether it is a new client or a repeated client, and information about the client, okay, you will store it in the session object. So there are different ways in which, as we said, HTTP state management is implemented. One is using the HTTP session object. Second is using the cookies. Third one is using the for what you say URL rewriting, and the fourth one is hidden fields. Hidden fields we don't use, but HTTP session, cookies we have already seen, and then next what we have is URL rewriting. So we'll discuss one at a time. Now, if you want to track this client, so what you do is, that is, when the client is sending the request for the first time, you'll take help of this request object to maintain the state, to get the session object. You'll take help of this request object and you will get a session object for this. In order to track this client request, you take help of this request object, and you will, with the help of the request object, you will get a session object which will help you maintain the client state. So once you get this session object, what you do is HTTP session is equal to request.get session. That is, in order to get this object, you need to request for the get session method. So request object will request for the get session. So when you're invoking get session method, you will receive a session object. This is the session object what you have received. So this session object will help you maintain the state of the client. Now, and then what you're doing is you're storing the client information. You're storing in the session object. So if you observe, what are we trying to do is this client information, this client information, you have stored it in the session scope. So once you have stored this client information in the session scope, now when the second request comes, you will check, okay, when the second request is coming, when the second request comes, you check whether that information is there in the client, in the session scope. Now you find, okay, fine, green and green, yes, this client information is already present in the session object. So what it is a request from the same client or from the new client. So what can the server conclude? Is the request from a new client or it is from a repeated client? What can the server conclude on this? Is the request from the new client or it is from the fresh client? This is the first request and this is the second request. When the second request is coming, your servlet, it is checking. When the second request comes, it is checking whether the information about this request is there in the session. If it is there, then what it is going to do? Is it going to treat it as a fresh request or a repeated request, or a new customer or a repeated customer? Quick. Correct. Zayed, you're correct. It is a repeated request. So correct. Hassan is also correct. Yes, it is a repeated request. So with the, now if you observe what you're doing, this is the session object. The red one is the session object. So with the help of this session object, you are figuring it out. By storing the information in the session object, we are making it out whether it is a fresh request or it is a repeated request. Now first time, let's assume this is your cart. Now first time, what are you adding is you have selected this object and you are adding this information. So whatever you have selected, then you select add to cart, it is adding the information in the session object. Now done. Second time, that is okay, you are again further, you have selected further one more item. Now this is the next item what you have selected. Again, first it will find out whether it is a request from client X or client Y. Based on that, it will add it to the same cart. Now this is how it works. Session object store the data of the customer or buying item information. Now over here, the session object, it depends how it is implemented. Now on the e-commerce websites, the buying information, what you are saying, buying item information, all complete information will not store onto the server side. It will store all the information onto the client side itself. But if you want, yes, you can implement it on server side, or else you can implement it with the help of the cookies. Both the ways it can be done, but in the real time it will save it onto the client side on cookies. Using cookies, information will be stored onto the client side, because if you are storing it onto the server side, let's say the cart is stored onto the server side, then you will be consuming resources onto the server side. This much, let's say, okay, this is some amount of data, let's say 1 MB of data. Assume this is not 1 MB, but let us assume it is 1 MB of data minimum. So this 1 MB of data, it has to be maintained onto the server side. So rather than maintaining it onto the server side, they are maintaining this information onto the client side. Now you have got two customers. For if it is maintaining or if it is tracking the session, any request that is sending by this customer will be added to his session object, because session object is independent for each customer, and for this are different. So because for this client the session ID is different, it will identify for this client this is the session ID, and for this client it is the session ID. Based on the session ID allocated to each client, the request will go to that specific object. So how do the container differentiate one session from the another session? Now these are two different sessions for two different clients. Over here if you see, these are the two different sessions for two different clients. So how do the containers differentiate this session object from this session object? So in order to differentiate the session object, what the container has is, container has got something called that is called as session ID. So this is the session ID and this is the another session ID. So for each session, the container will generate some unique ID. Let's say X, 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 and then Y, Y, Y. So each session, the container will maintain a different session ID. If you observe over here again in the cookies, you can find out session ID is maintained, settings, content settings. I think I have deleted all the stuff. Okay, if you see over here, see this is the ID that is being maintained. Okay, not in front of me. See how over here you can see. See, this is the J session ID. So this is based on this session ID, your session will be differentiated. So this is how the container will create. So you don't have to create this ID. For each session, the container will create the session ID in order to track the client request. Now, how it works. Now, this is your servlet. First, you need to request for the session object. Session object, if in case all the time you may not be interested in tracking the client. If your web application is interested in tracking the client request, then it should request for the session object. You will request for the session object by calling request.getSession. So when you call request.getSession, the container will provide you with the session object. If you see over here, you are provided with the session object. So once you are provided with the session object, you can start storing the data. Now, so request.getSession, then what you want to store over here? You want to store some home object. So if you want to store the home object, request session dot set attribute of home of home. So this is how, okay, this one will help you execute this session dot set attribute of home comma home. So this object is identified with what attribute? This object is identified by this key value. This object is identified by this. Session dot set attribute of home comma home. Are we clear so far? Do we have any doubt? Any questions? Okay, it is clear to Roma. How about Hassan and Zahid? Okay, to Hassan it is clear. This is how you do it. Now let's say, okay, you want, as you said, if in case if you want to log in and log out, if you want to track that, then you cannot track that in cookies. You have to track it in on server side. So user comma Tom. So once the login is successful, you are storing this user information. User is equal to Tom. Now if you have to retrieve the data, request.getSession. As usual, you will get a reference to the session object that is created by the container. And then you have got this user term is already stored in the session scope, and you want to retrieve this in the reverse process. Set is you are storing the object in the session scope, whereas get is the reverse process. You have to retrieve the object from the session scope. So this is the code what is required. Session dot get attribute of user. That is from the session scope you are pulling out or you are retrieving the information about the user. So session dot get attribute of user. You say session dot get attribute of user, it will return its value key and then the value. It will return you Tom. And then if you no longer require this, if the user has logged out and you don't want to maintain the state, you want to clean it up, you will call session.remove attribute of user. If you're providing this, it will remove it from the session scope. If you are calling remove attribute, it will remove that data from the session scope. Now, after you have removed the data from the session scope, let's say the user has logged out. So you need not maintain the information about the user. You don't require the session object either. You want to destroy the session object because the user has logged out. If the user has logged in, then you are storing the information about the user in the scope. And when the user has logged out, you want to remove the information about the user from the session scope, and then you want to destroy the session object itself. So if you want to destroy the session object when the user has logged out, then you need to call this method, invalidate method. Calling invalidate in the session will help you to destroy the session object. So this one is destroyed. Clear with this? So when you have login, you can store the information in the user scope, and when the user has logged out, then point number one, what you have to do is first session.remove attribute. First you have to remove that user information from the session scope, and then you need to remove this object. Remove the information and then call the invalidate method. When you're calling the invalidate method, it will destroy the session object. So this is how it works. So HTTP session, if you observe, it is for you have got the HTTP session API to maintain the state of the client. And HTTP servlet request, it has got access to the HTTP session. That is the reason you're calling request.getSession. That is the reason we are calling request.getSession. When you're calling request.getSession, it will supply you with this object. Now get ID, as we discussed, for each session it will create a new ID. If you want to find out, if you want to view the ID that has been created by the container, you can call get ID. If you want to check whether it is a new session or it is a repeated session or new login or a repeated customer, fresh customer or a repeated customer, then you can call it by is new. Get attribute, set attribute, and then remove attribute. We have seen all these methods. So now let us write the code for this. This is session. Right click and then say run. Wantedly I'm doing this so that it starts up the server. Now what we will do is first we'll create a form. Login form we will implement. Action is equal to login server. Input type is equal to text, and then name I can give it as username. And then this name you can give it as password. And then finally button you can input type is equal to button, sorry, submit. And then you can provide the placeholder. If you are familiar with the HTML, well and good, otherwise you can do a crash course on day24schools.com. And then I go to the source packages, right click new and then servlet. Let me add login servlet. And servlet is always a controller. So this will go under controller package, add information to the web.xml file, and then you click finish. So once you have added, this is the template. Let me remove all this stuff. So method what you should use, get or post. You're sending sensitive information, so whenever you're sending in sensitive information, always go with the post. To post. I'm just making it simple. String username is equal to request.get parameter of user we have done. And then the second field what you have is string password is password. If username dot equals, I'm just fixing it Tom, and password is equal to tom@123. Now if this is correct, then what you want to do is you want to maintain the session. HTTP session is equal to request dot get session. Import the respective package and then session dot set attribute. Username you want to store it in the request scope. User, and then the username you want to store it in the REST scope. And once you have logged in, generally what we do is you will redirect the user to the home page. So response dot send redirect. So redirect the user to home page. Let us write home.jsp, or like home servlet, let us write. Generally it will be JSP page, but I'm just writing this one. So you need to create one more servlet by name home servlet. Add this information to the web.xml. Over here what you will be doing is you will be retrieving, you need to implement this do post method, and retrieve the object from the session scope, and then you just have to print hi username. So HTTP session is equal to request dot, as we did, get the session object and retrieve the username from the request scope. String user is equal to session dot get attribute of user. I think this is what we have written. Yes. Retrieve it from the session scope and then take help of print writer object and then print it. Print writer out is equal to response dot get writer, and then out dot println user is equal to, oh sorry, hi, whatever is the user. And if you want, you can set the logout link ahref is equal to logout. Like this is called as dynamic links. Okay, crash course of HTML, www.day23schools.com. So let me check what did we login server. Tom@123. Let us give the same credentials so we are authenticated. Tom@123. Okay, get method is not supported by this URL it is saying, so what you have to do is in the index.html method is equal to post. Yes. Oh sorry. Home servlet, it is coming exception. Yes, it is added in web.excel. Tom@123. If it is username and password is correct, so you are going to this hi username. This Tom username, you are retrieving it from the request scope, and by default it is text/html. If you want this to work as a link, then you need to set the content type. Response dot set content type as text/html, so that this text will appear as a link. It will recognize that. Hi Tom, and then when you click onto the logout servlet, now logout servlet, it is giving the message resource not found. Whenever you see this method request resource not found, uh, it is either the resource is not available because we don't have the logout servlet. That could be one of the message, or sorry, that could be one of the reason, or else if you find that the resource is available, then definitely then it is definite that it is because of the spelling mistake. So for link it is always get. You don't have post for link. For links it is always get. Now you want, when a user clicks HTTP session is equal to request dot get session of false. This time I'll be using false because I want the old session. I don't want the new session to be created. I want the old session only that was created for that user. And then string username. First you will remove this attribute, whatever you have stored. Session dot remove attribute of user, and that's not returning anything, just remove it, and you will call the invalidate method to destroy the session. After the method has been invalidated, you can send dot redirect, response dot send redirect. You can send the user to the index.html to the home page. So you're removing the data from the session scope by calling remove attribute. You're destroying the session by calling invalidate, and then you are redirecting the user to the index.html page. So let us give the username as Tom and the password as Tom@123. So you click on this. You are at the home servlet as of now. Hi Tom. This Tom is retrieved from the session scope, and when you click onto the logout button, you'll go to the logout servlet. Then the session is invalidated and you are back onto the index.html page. Or else you can just print over here if you don't want to write this as of now. You can take help of the print writer object. Out.println logged out successfully. Just to visualize. So this is Tom@123. Sorry. Hi Tom, and then you click on this logout successful. So this is how a login and logout is implemented. The basic. With the help of sessions. So, do you have any questions for today's class? Is it added in web.xml? Hassan, what is added in web.xml? Can you please elaborate? Ignore it. Okay, fine. So, do we have any questions for today? So, try to implement this. I made it very simple. Just create a form, send it to the login servlet, then you validate the user, and then based on the credentials, you can redirect the user either to the home page, or you can redirect the user back to the login page if credentials are found to be invalid. So thanks for your participation. We'll wind up the session for today. Tomorrow we will discuss the cookies concept. If you have questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll wind up the session for today. And tomorrow, as usual, class will be at 7:30. Tomorrow's topic is cookies. Cookies, and then URL rewriting will complete that. Sure. Welcome. Bye bye. Yes, tomorrow class is at 7:30.